2 Samuel chapter 3, Big Mistakes is the title of this evening's consideration. Speaking of big mistakes, last Wednesday I made 2 of them to test you all. Everyone's job, there are those things that put a knot in your stomach. For me, one of them is when I make a mistake in the pulpit, or at least when I'm acting like I'm making a mistake. I just don't want to admit it. But anyhow, I had read the verse that mentioned when the young men were dueling that they grabbed each other by the beard when it's actually the head. And you may think that's a small oversight. I don't. When we get to Joab killing Amasa, he will grab him by the beard, more of a crest, but by the beard in tunnel vision, and allowed that one. The other one was, I mentioned that David was 25 when he was 30. So that's my confession. Let's move on. And believe it or not, I did not sleep well that night because of those 2 mistakes. If I make any more and you feel like pointing them out, don't. No, kidding. Verse 1. Now there was a long war between the house of Saul and the house of David, but David grew stronger and stronger, and the house of Saul grew weaker and weaker. Well, this did start in chapter 2 with the dueling men when they grabbed each other by the head and stabbed each other with likely shorter knives or shorter swords, longer knives. But this is spiritually also a indication of what we go through, dueling against the flesh, the kingdom of self, versus the spirit, the kingdom of God. One gets stronger and the other gets weaker. We're not to give up in this fight at all. We will fight it to the end. Abstain from fleshly lusts, which war against the soul. Peter wrote to the church. What were the apostles supposed to do? They had all these people coming into Christianity from the pagan world. They had some that were being born into Christianity. And yet the flesh is relentless. They all had to deal with it. And you can't, make it easy for them. It's, don't worry about it. It's just the flesh. You have to continue to convict and rebuke and exhort to encourage them to overcome. And they did this. And we come along and we are supposed to enter into this great grace we have as Christians, but at the same time, we have to understand that we are expected to have this long war between the house of the flesh and the house of the spirit. Galatians 5:17, for the flesh lusts against the spirit, and the spirit against the flesh, and these are contrary to one another, so that you do not do the things that you wish. Thank you, Lord, for Calvary, the cross, dying for our sins, where sin abounded, grace did much more. It says David grew stronger and stronger, and the house of Saul grew weaker and weaker. And the implication is that God was with David, and he was not with Ishbosheth, Saul's surviving son. Verse 2, sons of David were born in Hebron. I'll just take fragments of these next few verses concerning his sons. But David, of course, multiplied wives, and the kings were not supposed to multiply wives, that they would not be distracted. They were not to do several things to keep them focused on reigning over the people of God. But there's that flesh that they had to struggle with also. Before Hebron, David had 2 wives, Ahinoam and Abigail. Now he gets to Hebron, and he marries 4 more wives while he is there. Michal and Bathsheba are not listed in this list. That will raise the number to 8 wives total, not counting concubines. And what we have in this section is a tragic family photo in these names, because there's a history that belongs to many of these names. Some of them we don't know anything else about. But such are the rotten returns of sin, and in this case, polygamy and disobedience. The first one up is Amnon. I just like him the most. He was killed after committing an unspeakable sin against his stepsister. And his stepbrother, Absalom, killed him. And so he, a rapist, he ruined anybody to satisfy himself. But there's another character that goes with him, his little sidekick, Jonadab. 2 Samuel 13, Amnon had a friend, who's actually a cousin, whose name was Jonadab, the son of Shimeah, David's brother. Now, Jonadab was a very crafty man, and he's the one that says, well, here's how you do it. And so the two of them, pretty creepy characters we'll get to later. Verse 3, there is Chileab by Abigail, the widow of Nabal, the Carmelite, Absalom, the son of Micaiah, the daughter of Talmai, king of Geshur. So it was Geshur. Chileab is Abigail's son, as it says here, and they don't show up anymore, except in the genealogies. And again, I like to think that she got them out of the palace and went back to the ranch and stayed in touch with David from there. But in the 3rd chapter of 1 Chronicles, we read, now these were the sons of David who were born in Hebron, Daniel by Abigail the Carmelitess. Now, what happened to the name? Here it is Chileab, but in Chronicles it's Daniel. Well, I think the meaning of the names is going to be helpful here. Chileab means who's like my father, who is like dad. He bears a resemblance to his father. Maybe he had the red hair that David had, and it just was sort of the nickname. But Daniel, God is my judge, apparently was the given name to him. Absalom, the next character, almost as dislikeful as Amnon, loaded with arrogance. He had a whole head of hair, which I won't make any comment on people like that. I won't fault them for it. All right, we won't do any more humor tonight, or attempts at it. Anyway, Absalom, he would turn into a devil, and it was that pride that was certain to be the catalyst for this. He was the mastermind of his brother Amnon, who abused his sister, Amnon's stepsister, Absalom's sister, and of course he had him killed. He would be killed by Joab, who is a cousin. And he attempted to overthrow his father's kingdom. Not just take the kingdom, take his life, kill him. So much for Exodus 20:12, to honor your parents. That didn't mean much to Absalom. The throne was more important. At one point, Absalom gets banished from the kingdom. He has Amnon killed. He flees, he comes back, David gets him back, but David doesn't want to see him, sort of banishes him from the palace. And he begins to, he sets Joab's field on fire to get his attention, and Joab gets involved in the story and gets a wise woman from Tekoa, and has her lay out this dramatic story to David about, this son, and David does, touches his heart, and then she springs it on him. Well, it's, your son. And David, did Joab put you up to this? And yes, it did. And so then he comes back, Absalom. But anyway, I don't know if I've confused you with that. Maacah, the daughter of Talmai, king of Geshur, this is Absalom's mother. Now, Geshur was a Gentile kingdom north of Galilee and east of the Jordan River, on the other side of Jordan, as you go towards Syria. His grandfather, Absalom's grandfather, was a Gentile king, Talmai. Did Grandpa Talmai negatively influence Absalom? Well, we don't know, but why is David marrying a foreigner? This was his first wife. It is an early act of disobedience. Maybe David thought it was going to help him with his retreat and hiding from Saul. Either way, he wasn't supposed to do it. He should have just stuck with Abigail. Deuteronomy 7, nor shall you make marriages with them, that's those who are not believers. You shall not give your daughter to their son, nor take their daughter for your son. This is still a problem in Christianity. You have Christians that know the Bible prohibits this. The New Testament prohibits this unequal yoke, and they do it anyway. But I love him, I love her. And some get away with it, and they become carriers of this. And what I mean, for instance, you have two boys on a roof of let's say a tall garage, and they're young boys. And one jumps off, and he survives, he makes it. Now the other one thinks he's going to do the same thing, so he jumps off, and he doesn't make it. So there are those that commit a sin that the Bible prohibits, and they get away with it. And then others see it and think, well, because they got away with it, it must be okay to do. Be on guard against those things. That would be a big mistake. We try to do our best as Christians. That love is what quenches the Spirit? Quench not the Holy Spirit. One of the greatest things, the biggest culprits on quenching the Spirit is lovelessness. And that love first starts towards Christ. That's why we pursue obedience. Not only because it's better, it's better for us, it's healthier and good for society, but the main thing is we love the Lord. But that love is supposed to spill out. There's enough of it to spill onto other people. And when we don't have love, we are quenching the Spirit. We can be very crafty when it comes to making excuses not to love. Adonijah, verse 4, he was killed by his younger brother Solomon. Adonijah tried to pull a move on the throne of Solomon twice. First just outright, and then he tried to get it through Solomon's mother. And she comes to him and she tells, hey, Adonijah came and he asked me some things, and she's not, I don't know what's her problem with Bathsheba. And Solomon says, huh? And that was it for Adonijah. He dispatched, I believe Benaniah went and took him out. The verse 5 has this comment, because we don't know much about these other characters. These were born to David in Hebron. A fuller list is in 1 Chronicles 3, and that includes the 4 sons by David and Bathsheba, 9 other sons whose mothers aren't even named. So there's a lot of activity in the palace, a good place for Abigail to get out with all of the intrigue and all the drama that power moves. Who wants to be around that? Verse 6, now it was so, while there was war between the house of Saul and the house of David, that Abner was strengthening his hold on the house of Saul. So he's gaining more tribal support. Everybody is defective. Everybody's got an issue. They all should have just rallied behind David, and they did not. And they admit, it comes out in this chapter, that they knew better, especially Abner. Abner does not evidence any desire to be king. His forte was to be number 2. He was good at that, and that's where he excelled. And so he's got this power, so if he's going to be number 2 and Ishbosheth is going to be the king, and he has no respect for Ishbosheth, he's going to make sure that Ishbosheth is reduced to a puppet king, and he being the puppet master. Verse 7, and Saul had a concubine whose name was Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah. So Ishbosheth said to Abner, why have you gone into my father's concubine? Concubines were less than wives. They were, in that society, that was still a better life than what they came from and what they could have had. It's how it was. Abraham had concubines. Jacob had concubines. The practice continued until the age of the kings, and it kind of falls off the chart in the Bible for us. It doesn't fall off in practice for other countries, but it did with the Jews. And this concubinage was an Eastern practice. It did not come from Moses. However, the law of Moses had in it laws to protect them from being abused, guarding them from inhumane treatment. And you can read about that if you so desire in Exodus 21 and Deuteronomy 10. But it's a fact. This was a concubine of Ishbosheth, the king, and he makes this accusation against Abner, and that was a big mistake. So big a mistake, it's going to set in motion the the things that will have them both killed. That's how big of a mistake it was. It's a charge of treason for a king to say, this is my property. And that's what concubines were viewed, and wives do, as property. And he is saying, you have taken my property, which is tantamount to treason. You're trying to take my throne. Absalom will do this when he attacks David, and David leaves Jerusalem, flees Jerusalem, and Absalom comes and tries to make this very statement. He does make this statement, but it will cost him his life. So, again, the king's harem, royal property, and it was to be passed to the heir, and not just to anyone. Largely why David is going to demand his wife back, Michal. We'll come to that in a little bit. But this miscalculation was a fatal miscalculation that precipitated fatal events. Verse 8, then Abner became very angry at the words of Ishbosheth and said, am I a dog's head that belongs to Judah? Today I show loyalty to the house of Saul your father, to his brothers and to his friends, and have not delivered you into the hand of David, and you charge me today with a fault concerning this woman. I'm tempted to read the word beard, but I did not do it. If you're joining us online late, you missed it. Anyhow, not that it was that great. Dogs, they weren't considered these domesticated, cute little things that we mostly associate them. I have a question for those who think dogs go to heaven. Do the mean ones go to hell? Just wondering. Full of junkyard dogs down there. These dogs were scavengers, and they lived off of dead things and trash, and they were viewed with contempt. They were mangy. It was really an insult. And so by Abner's response and how hot it is, he is likely not guilty of this. The charge was likely unfounded. But Ishbosheth's clumsy attempt to put him on the spot out of his paranoia, it exploded in his face. And now this is his downfall. It's almost as bad as calling a conservative a liberal. No, that would be worse. Anyway, we love liberals. We'd love to see them saved. And that's serious, but we can't stand their politics because it's harmful to humanity, and they think they're getting away with it. Anyway, no-brainer pretty much. I'm sure somebody is going to be offended by that, but the truth, you can't, as Martin Luther said, I don't know how not to offend guilty people. If you're guilty, you're going to get offended. Anyway, verse 9, may God do so to Abner and more also if I do not do for David as Yahweh has sworn to him. This is the worst kind of mistake. It is a big mistake again. First, we have David making the big mistake of marrying a Gentile and then adding wives to and creating a harem. And then we have Ishbosheth. He is accusing his right-hand man, the man with the power, the kingmaker in the north, Abner, with a serious crime of treason. And now Abner's big mistake is he knew God wanted David on the throne, and not only did he not lift a finger to make that happen when he could really have done it, he works against it. He's been fighting against David. The house of Saul versus the house of Judah. They were going at it with swords. So Abner admits that he knew that it was God's will for David to be king, yet seriously and willfully battled against the known will of God. What makes people do this? Well, unbelief is a simple answer. They don't believe it. To them, God is not as real as what's in front of them. This was Esau's problem. To Esau, what was real was, meat and food and, having a good time. Whereas Jacob, even though he was criminal in many ways, he still knew that God was above all this and God was going to work this out, which comes with knowing God. You know that he is every bit sovereign. Ignoring God's will is never a good idea or plan. It is always a step in the wrong direction, and it is always a bad decision and a big mistake. Yet your flesh, my flesh, does not care that we believe that. Well, how is that going to get settled? Well, it's going to get settled through prayer, study of the Word, fellowship, communing with the Lord. Communing is, when we talk about communion with the Lord, we're not talking only of limiting it to the cup and the bread. Anybody can have the cup and the bread, can take it at least. It doesn't mean they have a relationship with Christ, that they know him and they know he knows them. That's what communion is. Communion is this being in common, going in the same direction, in unity, and it's rhythm in the heart. So anyway, the verse 10, he says in part of his threat to Ishbosheth that he's going to transfer the kingdom from the house of Saul and set up the throne to David over Israel and over Judah from Dan to Bathsheba. Dan to Bathsheba was like saying from coast to coast. In their case, 150 miles, but it would cover all of the promised land. Abner was hot. I mean, this was what, there was no bringing him back. If he sent him a fruit basket, he wasn't going to change. Oh, you know what, maybe I was a little hard on the kid. Ishbosheth's in his 40s. And Abner's not putting up with this. Years ago, I worked on a big job, a bridge, and the floor boss, one of the big bosses, is a good man. And everybody liked working with him and under his leadership. And there was a holiday came up, and they did not pay him for that holiday. And he was hot. I mean, he was like, there was no bringing him back. He left. And they lost. It was our loss. We noticed his absence. And this kind of the situation here, Abner had done so much for the kingdom. How dare you launch a charge against me, especially when he's innocent? But spiritually, he was dead to God's word. So as men go, he was a great man. Just wasn't a good man. He will be physically dead and unable to join into God's will before this is all over because of these big mistakes. To remind us, big mistakes count. So does big love to counteract it. I think about how, in my younger years, I did not have the Christian love. How would I have done? Well, later on, I did get the Christian love, and I would have done like that. If you're young, work on that Christian love now. Don't waste a moment. Develop the love of Christ. Verse 11, and he could not answer Abner another word because he feared him. Well, that fear characterized his father Saul, and now it's his. Saul always feared, and he feared the wrong thing when other men did not. And in his position, he did not have that right as king. We've covered this, but it's good to review it. He feared his calling. How many Christians are afraid to serve? Well, I might fail. People might find out I'm not all that. So, no guts, no glory. And if you want to live your life hiding behind that, God will have at it. He's not going to shove you out the plane with your parachute. Saul feared his own army. I'm afraid, the people, the troops won't. Well, you're the general. You're the king. That's upside down. He feared Goliath. Well, that one kind of makes a little sense, but he shouldn't have shown it in front of the men, and that's what he did. He quaked in front of them, and everybody was afraid. They had the high ground. They could have bum-rushed Goliath. That's a lot of bad guys coming at you real fast who have nothing to lose, incidentally. That's the punchline to the whole thing. Anyhow, they did not. When Goliath was strutting out there, the army should have said, let's attack. They would have dealt with that giant. He feared David. 3 times in one chapter that comes out. That's a big fear. He feared that there would be a coup against him. In chapter 22 of 1 Samuel, he feared the Philistine army, which he was called to fight. Well, he feared them because he wasn't ready for them because he was too busy chasing David. And then finally, he feared death and defeat on Mount Gilboa that Samuel told him from the grave was going to happen, he feared so much he collapsed. So that fear, you look at that and you say, okay, if I struggle with fear, I'm going to do just that, struggle. But Saul never seems to have struggled against it. We all have fear. The bravest of the brave have fear. But they try as best they can to corral that thing, to keep it in check as best they can, whereas Saul never made that effort. At least we have no evidence of it. Verse 12, then Abner sent messengers on behalf to David, saying, whose is the land? Saying also, make your covenant with me, and indeed my hand shall be with you to bring all Israel to you. Well, I want to just pause before I comment on verse 12 and say, Saul, though he was a man of fear, he was still relatively gallant on the battlefield. But outside of that, that fear really messed him up. Here in verse 12, Abner realizes that now is the time. Ishbosheth is as incompetent as he thought, and it's pointless to continue to commit to him, and he's still hot at the insult. I mean, that's fueling the whole thing. He's going to look out for himself and change teams, not because God anointed David. That is not his motive. It's just better for him. This is, of course, less than ideal, but he'll not be there to see David take the throne. He is going to be really the human point of getting David to consolidate the nation. The north and the south will come together. This was a very big move, and it did speed things up a lot. Though it wasn't instant, but it did speed it up. God, as I said, will not allow him to ride with David, and God will not allow those who reject his rule to ride with him either. They won't ride with Jesus Christ when he returns to take his kingdom as King of Kings. Revelation 19:14, and the armies in heaven, clothed in fine linen. In other words, as troops, we're going to make a fashion statement. It's probably going to be warm weather, thus the linen, white and clean. You won't draw too much of attention to yourself because we'll all be in dress whites. Followed him on white horses. We're like super camouflaged. The clouds, Anyway, what a scene. I believe that that's as a literal depiction of what's going to happen. I don't know that it's going to really be horses or not. I would like a Corvette. I mean, it's just my preference. But anyway, I know. Now, don't call me out on this and say, what do you mean it won't be really horses? Maybe a few mules tucked in there or something. You could have a lot of fun with that unless you're really uptight. Anyhow. And no, it's not blasphemous or sacrilegious. Revelation is so filled with symbols that you just got to be careful. Verse 13. And David said, good, I will make a covenant with you. So he's telling the messenger this, to go back to Abner. But one thing I require of you, you shall not see my face unless you first bring Michal, Saul's daughter, when you come to see my face. FaceTime with each other is going to be predicated by Michal being back where she belongs. David's first wife, who initially loved him. She helped him escape assassins. David would have died that night were it not for Michal. What a lesson to newlyweds and older weds. The love from before, you've got to fight for it. You act so surprised when, I don't have the same feelings when I grow up. Life is that way with a lot of things. Look, you stick around long enough, there'll be a lot of desserts you won't like as much as you used to like. You'll find other desserts. But that's okay with desserts, not okay with people. Ultimately, Saul gave Michal, her father, gave her to David. Then he gives her, after David flees, to another man. He had no right to do that, but typical Saul. Make a problem for as many people as he could, long as he felt good about himself. The word again is a sociopath. No feelings for anybody else, just himself. And if he had exhibited any feeling for anybody else, because he was up to something. And there are people like this. All right, we're not supposed to go back to Saul. We're done with him. I didn't even like Saul's dog. No, anyway. As king, David knows he's coming into the throne now of all kingdoms. Once Abner comes over, it's all going to be his. And he cannot leave her with another man. That is a big no, a big mistake in that culture at that time, especially if she bore sons for that illegitimate husband, which David was still married to her. He never divorced her. Abigail, we remember, left her very well-to-do ranch with servants and a lot of livestock to be with David in exile on the run. She even ends up being kidnapped with the rest of the village in Ziklag. Michal did not go to David. Instead, she became unfaithful to David. Michal remained childless. Apparently, later in life, she does a noble thing, as a person goes, and she raises her sister's, Merab's, children for her, and we get that in 2 Samuel 21. And it's just a sad story because we're not told how she felt about going back to David, but we do know that she was resentful, and she didn't care for his brand of worship. And she let him know. She couldn't wait to let him know that. She ran out the house. Oh, look at you. And she just, he's just loving the Lord. And here, the little foxes that spoil the vine, and in this case, the Michal that spoiled the worship. So she's not a Bible hero. If you want, it's just a fact. There are others who are, though. So, I like Abigail so much that I plan to talk to David about this. Because he can't beat me up. We'll be in heaven. What can he do? If he doesn't like the question, I can follow him and annoy him and nag him. He can't do anything. We're in heaven. It's like being on base. So David, verse 14, sent messengers to Ishbosheth, Saul's son, saying, "Give me my wife Michal, whom I betrothed to myself for 100 foreskins of the Philistines." Now, if he had divorced her, he would not be able to do this, according to Deuteronomy 24. Once she becomes, if they separated and she married someone else, but that's not what happened. She was Ishbosheth's sister, and Ishbosheth, the king of the north, was David's brother-in-law. And seeing how he is now the eldest, or the head of the home, the oldest surviving male in the home, he is the patriarch. He's accountable, and he's king. He has to enforce this. David says, I paid for her. He says 100 foreskins, that was the agreement, but he brought back 200. And he's not, the equivalent has not been given to him as compensation, so the marriage is intact. If someone had paid him, here is your dowry back, then things would have gone the other way. So they were still married, is the point. Verse 15, and Ishbosheth sent and took her from her husband, from Paltiel, the son of Laish. So as the king enforces, he is the one that annuls the enforcement, annulling the marriage of Michal to Paltiel. Verse 16, then her husband went along with her to Bahurim, weeping behind her. So Abner said to him, go return, and he returned. You read that with no emotion, like there's nothing happened. There's a lot. Bahurim, incidentally, is near Jerusalem, just east of the Mount of Olives, and he followed for a while. Again, we're not told how she felt, but we know how he is feeling. He's sniveling behind them. And yet a single word from Abner is sufficient. He ends that because Abner was that tough a man that you don't make him say it twice. My dad was like that. I never got hit because I saw what he could do to my brother. And I just figured it was smart to do what he said the first time he said it. And he was not, not a quick draw at all. Very patient. But anyhow, so Paltiel, sniveling behind Michal, not wanting to give her up, he is forced, and life is hard. Verse 17. Now Abner had communicated with the elders of Israel, saying, in time past you were seeking for David to be king over you. Verse 18. Now then do it, for Yahweh has spoken of David, saying, by the hand of my servant David I will save my people Israel from the hand of the Philistines and the hand of all their enemies. Well, so now it's convenient for Abner to make this speech. But when Saul was hunting him like a partridge, it was not something to bring up. But now he's campaigning for himself. Again, God's will and David being king is really secondary. It's important is he's going to be the number 2 man in this kingdom, and he's going to have a better man to serve than Ishbosheth. That is how Abner is thinking. Joab's not going to be ready to give that up on several levels, and we're coming to that. Verse 19, and Abner also spoke in the hearing of Benjamin, that's the tribe of Benjamin. Then Abner also went to speak in the hearing of David in Hebron, all that seemed good to Israel, and the whole house of Benjamin. So he's on a speaking tour. He's stumping for David. Saul's tribe would be the hardest to win, you would think, but it actually looks like they're relieved. Not a hard sell. But the formalities, you couldn't skip anybody. Don't do that. Miss Ishko, hey, you didn't even mention us in the thank you speech. Oh, brother. You're just safer with thanking mom and leave the list short. Verse 20, so Abner and 20 men with him came to David at Hebron, and David made a feast for Abner and the men who were with him. So they're spending some time bonding there. It'll take a while to get all the food ready, and I always often picture a luau, though it's not, but I picture, candles or lamps burning and a lot of meat and pineapples, things like that. So, verse 21. The brain is such a rascal, is it not? It is just it just throws things into the picture that just don't belong there, like dreams. Like, oh, that was crazy. I would never buy a car that color. But anyhow, verse 21. Then Abner said to David, I will arise and go and gather all Israel to my lord the king, that they may make a covenant with you, and that you may reign over all that your heart desires. So David sent Abner away, and he went in peace. You can hear David's hands clapping and rubbing together. Yes, finally, we can do something with the kingdom now. He's been thinking about this for years, what he's going to do as king. He's not coming onto the throne like as a rookie. But so now he thinks this is it. Hebron, where this is taking place, is a city of refuge. If you accidentally kill somebody, and you know that their family members, they're not going to want to hear it was an accident. They're going to try to kill you, or they have the right to kill you. So you run to one of these cities of refuge for refuge. And if you make it, you're safe. They hear you out. If your story meets the requirement, then you get to hide in the city. If it doesn't, they throw you to the family, and that's it. Abner, he killed David's nephew. We read about that last week. He said, stop chasing me. He didn't stop. He poked him. He kills the guy in battle. That's going to come back to the story a little bit. I will say, heaven, of course, is the final refuge. The bonuses that belong to heaven, no politicians, no lawyers, not one. I mean, people who are lawyers will make it in, but they will be disbarred. No lobbyists, no journalists, no snooping around trying to find a story to ruin your life. No broke, woke, it's a joke people. Woo-hoo! A lot of sin will be smacked down, all of it, and looking forward to that. Well, I don't know how I got onto that, but anyway, verse 22. Suppressed vitriol. At that moment, the servants of David and Joab came from a raid and brought much spoil with them. But Abner was not with David in Hebron, for he had sent him away, and he had gone in peace. Again, Abner was not going to be a number 3 guy. He was too seasoned for that. And Joab was not either. So you have a problem, and David already doesn't like Joab. So he's thinking this is going to be a good fit. Where it says they came back from a raid, nowadays we complain about a lot of things because we have a lot of things to complain about. But in those days, well, I'll say it this way. Nowadays, conquest, in the time we live in, until Antichrist gets into power, mostly in Western civilization, the raids are launched by giant tech, giant finance, puppet politicians and their activist flunkies, financial oligarchs. These are the ones that are coming against us. We don't have hordes coming over the hill, going to burn down the village. They come against us in different ways. They find out what we like, what we love, and they now are targeting that. You love your kids? Let's attack the kids. You love your religion? Let's go after that. You love your guns? Let's go. Whatever you like, that's where the battlefield is. For these people in those days, you had to fear an army coming and wiping you out and looting you as Joab did. Satan at work. Today, again, these overrule the voting ballots, raiding into lives. They are the giants in the land. So next time you hear the giant tech, connect that to the Nephilim and the Gibors of Genesis 6. Because those people had to deal with the giant tech of their day. The people that had so much control, they enslaved the world. The global cabal is what we are facing, though, unlike, well, they did back in Genesis before the flood. Everybody was centered in Shinar. But power plotters with unlimited resources, they think they're calling the shots on the earth. And we, the Christians, we understand this. We see it. We're not fazed by it. We will fight for the faith that we have, and that's it. It's not simplifying it, but I'm not complicating it either. I guess, when you're young in ministry, you get all these catchy phrases and sayings from pastors, and I can't think of one at the moment. But as you serve, you find out that all those phrases are relatively useless against the indulgences of the flesh. And it's no longer about catchy phrases, standing up in the pulpit telling you, and you, ooh, I love that saying, you write it down. I found that it comes down to just a toe-to-toe, bare-knuckle fight, the flesh versus the spirit. But you can't jade everybody. Tell them, get rid of those sayings. I'm not saying that. I am saying that it's a long struggle. And the main things will always be the main things. And Paul said this to the church, to the Colossians. He said, all that stuff is useless against the indulgences of the flesh. You're still going to have to fight your kingdom versus the flesh's kingdom. And if those things help you, continue with them. If you find they're no longer helping, don't lose your faith, because many do. They write books with all these catchy things. They find out the flesh is relentless and beating them up, and they leave the faith because they made demands on God that they weren't entitled to demand. And so I rather as honest as we can approach. But it's tough because we get plugged into other people and people we love. And we see them struggle, and the fight is ours. It should be. Every one of us should have somebody that we're fighting for on our knees. When Lot was stolen from Sodom and Gomorrah, Abraham went to get him back. He didn't say, I never liked that kid anyway. He was a hard-headed lad. He armed himself and went after him. And that's a picture of us not settling for Satan taking captives. Now, we can't get an army together and retrieve our loved ones. We go on our knees to do these things, and we stay strong in our faith. And when we get knocked down, we get back up, which Satan hates. Satan hates where sin abounded, grace did much more, because he can't shut it up. He can't stop it. He cannot unpublish it. He cannot make us unsee Jesus Christ. And so his attempts to torment us, and we fight back by being the salt of the earth, the light of the world. It's no longer a romantic journey for me. It's no longer, I am the light of the world, the salt of the earth. I'm the light of the world. Now I'm meeting resistance, and it's a whole nother thing. Anyhow, maybe maybe you're still in that place in your Christian walk where it's just beautiful. Enjoy it. Now that I've sufficiently bummed everybody out, listen, reality is no fun. We don't want to hear it, please. Verse 23, then Joab, a pause there. I want to make this point. I really do. You can say, think about all the churches you've attended, and where are some of those people now? And that reminds you of how serious Christianity is. Life is. Where are they now? Many of them, 1,000 may fall at my side, 10,000 at my right hand, and shall not come near me. Why? Because I'm going to stick with the Lord. Regardless of what they're doing, I'm sticking with the Lord. That is contagious stuff. And it makes iron sharpens iron when that begins to happen. Verse 23, then Joab and all the troops that were with him had come. They told Joab, saying, Abner, the son of Ner, came to the king, and he sent him away, and he has gone in peace. Now, the historian repeats that he has gone in peace twice. He has that luxury, that ability to put that in the text for us because it struck a note with him. He could have left it out, and Abner has gone. He says he has gone in peace because violence is coming. Verse 24, and Joab came to the king and said, what have you done? Look, Abner came to you. Why is it that you sent him away and he is already gone? Verse 35, surely you realize that Abner, the son of Ner, came to deceive you, to know you're going out and you're coming in, and to know all that you are doing. Now, David's not accountable to Joab. And my thinking is because Joab is such a violent man whenever he pulls out his sword, that we tend to think when he speaks he's as violent. But I don't think we should do that. I think the story says, no, that's not the case. He is challenging David's decision, but not his authority. In his position, he is supposed to voice his concerns. I mean, if you're the head of security and you say to the person that you are subordinate to, listen, you got a problem. You've got to fix this. What makes you think this is not going to blow up in your face? You have every right. It doesn't mean he's being insubordinate. I think if he had been insubordinate, David would have dealt with him. In fact, some of David's men would have dealt with Joab for that. If you don't see it that way, then it creates other problems going forward. I think Joab knew his place, and David's going to rake him over the coals in a few minutes in front of everybody, which appears to me he's trying to provoke Joab to do something so he can kill him. We'll get into that in a minute. So my point is in verse 25, when wherever we were, verse 24 and 25, when Joab is sharing, David, this was a mistake. He's come to spy us out. He is not being insubordinate, at least not outwardly. Verse 20, he is inwardly. Verse 26, and when Joab had gone from David's presence, he sent messengers after Abner, who brought him back from the well of Sirah, but David did not know it. This is, Joab's not going to say this is insubordination when it is. Joab is saying, this man wants my job, but he killed my brother, and I'm going to kill him. Two birds with one stone. Abishai, who's loyal to David to his death, he's an accomplice here, but he's not the main one. Joab is the one. And he is not about to let Abner be over him. He knows what deal was just made. Also, he doesn't want anybody to think you can kill somebody close to him and get away with it. So he's not going to have this. In verse 27. Now, he's got his case ready in his head because he has to have legal grounds or else he's going to have a problem with the people. And what are the legal grounds? Hebron is a city of refuge. Abner killed his brother. Joab's the avenger of death. Abner has to get in that city and stay there. And if he doesn't, he's fair game. Well, that's not all the story, but Joab can make a case for that. We'll come in verse 27. When Abner had returned to Hebron, Joab took him aside in the gate to speak with him privately, and there stabbed him in the stomach, so that he died for the blood of Asahel, his brother. That's his main motives. He's not going to admit that, well, I don't want anybody else being number one, but he's going to do it again later to somebody else. Abner foolishly walked into the trap Joab set for him. He should just never have let them, look, just not going to let you get that close to me. It says Joab took him aside in the gate to speak with him privately. Abner's thinking that, it's water under the bridge. I killed your brother in battle. That's how it happened, and you have no right to harm me, and he's being a fool, Abner is. Joab is the consummate killer. He just knows how to kill and has no hesitation. Absalom and Amasa will find out. And he who lives by the sword dies by it. I think of, remember Ehud was going to kill Eglon, one of the enemy kings of the Jews, and he makes a dagger, and he was left-handed, but he got his move together so Eglon would never see it coming. And I'm reminded of this is likely because you can't pull out a sword and you're standing right there with a guy. The Hebrew word for sword and dagger are the same as used here. Well, Deuteronomy 19, lest the avenger of blood, if you accidentally kill someone, while his anger is hot, pursue the manslayer and overtake him, because the way is long. This is why the cities were not too far apart from all the other tribal dwellings. And it said, and kill him, though he was not deserving of death, since he had not hated the victim in time past. See, Joab would take a verse like that and spin it, Numbers 35. Or if he strikes him with a wooden hand weapon, which he did, by which one could die, and he does die, he is a murderer, and the murderer shall surely be put to death. That's how Joab would say it. He said, well, this wasn't an accident. Well, no, he could twist the law to just make it difficult. With the priesthood in disarray as it was at this time, he could get away with it, and he did. He does. Joshua 20, verse 4. And when he flees to one of those cities and stands at the entrance of the gate of the city and declares in his case in the hearing of the elders of that city, which Abner did not do, they shall take him into the city as one of them and give him a place that he may dwell among them. The gate of the city is the entrance of the city, where the war plans were made and the court was held and big deals went on. Abner would never have said, I'm going to live. I mean, he's not going to do that. He's not going to hide in a city of refuge. He'll fight it out. But he didn't get a chance. Joab knew that. That's why he cowardly kills him, murders him, assassinates him, however we want to say it. David doesn't kill Joab for the murder of Abner. David restrains himself. I don't think because Joab's mother was David's sister. I don't think it is only because Joab was a solid military commander, very useful to David. I think that David knew that this was a fragile state that the nation was in. It would have been not to their advantage. It was not justice, it was revenge, but he's going to let it slide. Verse 28. Well, not in his heart, though. He's going to carry this till his grave. David is. Afterward, verse 28, afterward, when David heard it, he said, my kingdom and I are guiltless before Yahweh forever of the blood of Abner, the son of Ner. So he immediately disassociates himself with Joab's act of murder, but not with Joab. It would have been viewed in the north as an assassination, and that would have ignited hatred, and it would have just been on and on before the kingdom was united. So David is quick to get this press release out. Verse 29, let it rest on the head of Joab and on all his father's house, and let there never fail to be in the house of Joab, one who has a discharge or is a leper, who leans on a staff, falls by the sword, or lacks bread. He just unleashes on this guy a curse. The first three make him ceremonially unclean, violent deaths, beggars and poor people. Now, just because David sends this curse out doesn't mean God says, okay, I'll honor that. There's no evidence that God does. It was Joab's crime, not his descendants. Ezekiel 18:20. Anybody who believes in generational curses is not following the Bible example. Just in a short one, if that were so, none of that generation out of the wilderness could have entered into the promised land till 10 generations later. Just silly. There are people looking for excuses for sin, or they've gotten hold of bad doctrine. There are consequences to a generation sinning, but that is not the same thing as this mystical curse that is on them and they can't break out of it. Two different things. Jesus Christ cancels the curse. Galatians 3, Christ has redeemed us from the curse of the law, having become a curse for us. I could go on about the generational curses, but why should I give them airtime? Verse 30, so Joab and Abishai, his brother, killed Abner because he had killed their brother Asahel in Gibeon in the battle. Abishai is named an accomplice to Joab in killing Abner. We've got 4 A's going on here. Abner, well, no, 3, not Joab. Not only is my math messed up with David being 30, but I just can't get the alphabet right now. Anyway, David, verse 31, then David said to Joab and to all the people who were with him, tear your clothes, gird yourselves with sackcloth, and mourn for Abner. And King David followed the coffin. He publicly shames Joab, almost taunting him again. He demands that he tear his clothes, gird himself with sackcloth. I would be like putting, coarse material against your skin. Closest I can get is if I put my undershirt on backwards, the label bothers me. But, all right, maybe not. Bloodthirsty Joab, he's no fool. Why doesn't he now defy David and say, I'm not doing that. He killed my brother because he knows better. Because he can tell, he can look in David's face and see David is hot. And David is ready to pounce. He's just looking for the excuse. And that's why when at the end of David's life, he says to his son Solomon, you need to kill that guy. I could not do it. It would have just been too much of a destabilization of everything that was going on. But you got a fresh start, son. And he is bad news. And Joab handed it to Solomon in betrayal. And, of course, Joab runs to the temple thinks that he's on base. They won't kill me here. And Benaniah takes him out. Verse 32, and they buried Abner in Hebron, and the king lifted up his voice and wept at the grave of Abner, and all the people wept. Verse 33, and the king sang a lament over Abner and said, should Abner die as a fool dies? Well, he did. Abner's death was unbecoming of a man of such stature. The battlefield or old age, but not like an assassination like this. He wasn't given a fair chance. He was killed by someone who was pretending to be his ally. He had just left a very good meeting. And again, 1 Kings chapter 2, verse 5, we find out David's not going to he never lets this go out of his mind. Though Abishai, he doesn't have this feeling. Abishai later, when Shemaiah is cursing David, Abishai is right there next to David. I can kill this guy for you. Just let me kill this man. He should not be talking to you that way, David. Verse 34, your hands were not bound. This is still the song. Your hands were not bound, nor your feet put in fetters. As a man falls before wicked men, so you fell. Then all the people wept over him. And so he's calling Joab a wicked man. He's saying, you were no prisoner. You didn't commit a crime and they bound you and executed you. You weren't even a prisoner of war. You were just slaughtered by this sneaky guy. And Joab's there listening to all of this. Why isn't he protesting? Because he knows this is a very dangerous situation for him right now. verse 30. Again, I think David felt very strongly he could not justify just executing Joab. I think that's some of what's going on, looking at this from several thousand years later. Verse 35, and when all the people came to persuade David to eat food while it was still day, David took an oath, saying, God do so to me and more also if I taste bread or anything else till the sun goes down. So he's fasting, heartfelt grief. The people are taking all of this in, and they're going to line up with David. Verse 36, now all the people took note, and it pleased them, since whatever the king did pleased all the people. That's telling us if David snapped his finger and said, kill that guy, that would have been it. And, I wrestled with that when I was a new Christian and reading this story. Why didn't David kill this guy? Verse 36, now all the people took note. I read that. Well, I want to comment on, since whatever the king did pleased all the people, of course, like we want to do with Christ, the power of influence, it's okay to imitate a hero. In fact, when you're learning, it's a good thing to do until you can find out, where you belong, if you need. Ephesians 5:1, therefore be imitators of God as dear children. David is leading them in mourning, and the pathos that was on his face and in his eyes and in his tone convinced the people that this was genuine, and they mourned with him. They felt it. Verse 37, for all the people in all Israel understood that day that it had not been the king's intent to kill Abner, the son of Ner. Joab's revenge jeopardized the consolidation of the nation. And verse 38, then the king said to his servants, do you not know that a prince and great man has fallen this day? So he's driving home his point. It was a loss to them. And verse 39, and I am weak today, though anointed king, and these men, the sons of Zeruiah, are too harsh for me. Yahweh shall repay the evildoer according to his wickedness. Again, these are his nephews, and he is laying it out in public that I can't kill them. I think the conviction is he would be committing a crime. David would feel he's committing a crime because of this whole avenger of death thing being tossed up like it is. It would have been nice if a priest could step forward and say, David, we can win this case, kind of a thing. May God keep us from making big mistakes. And many were made in this chapter. David keeps it together, and he's very noble at that. Let's pray. Our Father, may we be able to identify whatever lessons are here for us, either to apply to ourselves or perhaps use to glorify you. We love you and worship you. May you get us all home safely tonight, we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.